So we have talked a little bit about fluids, right? And we've talked about how, you know, the density of the fluid and the density of the object, when you consider those things together, it can cause a buoyant force upwards. So what I'd like for us to do is dig a little bit deeper into that idea of the fluids and buoyant force, okay? So we're going to draw 4 different diagrams here. And I'd like for us to draw each one of those 4 so that it makes sense with the others, okay? So, for example, the force of gravity on Pua should be the same every single time, right? We're going to show that by making the vector the same length every single time. All right, so these are the 4 diagrams. If you've got your notes open, you can probably see them, but I'm going to demonstrate it as well just so that you can kind of think about it and look at it. Okay, so the 4 scenarios are this. The first scenario is the ball or Pua being held underwater. So I'm going to exert a force holding him under the water there. And so you can see Pua is there underneath the water. He's not touching the ground. He's just being held underneath the water. So what are the forces on Pua as he is underneath the water? I'll give you about 30 seconds to kind of think about that and draw a free body diagram or a force diagram for the forces on Pua when he is underneath the water. All right, I'll give you a little bit of time to come back to that later, but I expect some of you are done drawing that free body diagram. So the next thing is I would like for you to draw the forces on Pua the instant that I release him. Okay, so he's still fully submerged under the water, but what are the forces right after I release him, right? So there's got to be some type of net upward force. So make sure the lengths of your forces demonstrate that, okay? So that we can see what it looks like there. Okay, so the second one is upon release. All right, now number 3 is the forces on Pua as he is floating in the water. Okay, so now he's just sitting there, he's floating on top. What are the forces on Pua as he floats on top of the water? All right, and lastly, I would like for you to show a free body diagram. I would like for you to pretend now that Pua is made of solid steel. Okay, so same Pua, same shape, same everything. The only difference is that now instead of being made out of cheap plastic, he's made out of steel. So we put him in the water, and what are the forces on him as he obviously sinks into the water? Okay, so now that he's made out of steel, he's sinking, not at the bottom of the water, but as he is sinking, what are the forces on him? Again, I want the forces here to connect to coordinate with the forces that you were drawing in the previous 3 drawings. All right, I'll give you 1 more minute to finish that one up, make any adjustments on the other 3 that you need to, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, let's see. David, can you share with us what your free body diagram looks like for the first scenario where Pua is being held under the water?
Sure. You want me to describe it?
Yeah, if you can, show us a picture of it, or maybe if it's on your screen, you can screen share, or you could even do a screen share and show the whiteboard and you could draw it on there real quick, but just give us an idea of what it looks like.
Okay, I mean, I kind of drew it small, and I think that sort of hurt it. But anyways, I'll just sort of describe the forces. So going up,
Okay.
there's a strong buoyant force. And then going down, there's the force of your hand on Pua, and also the force of gravity.
All right. Sounds good. Hopefully everybody got that. So you should have the force of gravity going down. You should have a buoyant force, which is larger than the force of gravity. And you should have the force of your hand pushing down. Okay, now one of the things to make sure of is that the force vectors of the gravity and the hand add together to give you the same length as the buoyant force. All right, awesome. Adit, can you share with us your second one?
Yeah, I could just show it to you. I just basically had the buoyancy force much greater than the force of gravity. So
How does that relate to your first one?
it's just basically there's no force of your hand. There's no applied force.
Okay, good. So those two forces, the buoyant force and the force of gravity, should be identical to your first drawing. They should have exactly the same length because it's still submerged under the water. Gravity is the same. It's still displacing the same amount of water. Therefore, the buoyant force should be the same. So if you compare it to the first drawing, the buoyant force and the force of gravity should be identical to what it was before. The only difference is you don't have the force of the hand. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Camilla, can you share with us your third drawing?
For my third drawing, the buoyant force and the force of gravity were the same length.
All right. Very good. All right. So yes, you should have the buoyant force and the force of gravity the same length. The force of gravity, again, should be identical to your previous two drawings. The force of gravity isn't changing in all of this. The buoyant force has gotten smaller. All right, very good. I think that's great. All right, and the last one, let's see, Dory, can you share us what you got on that last one there?
I had for the last one same buoyant force, since you said that it's the same volume, so it displaces the same amount of water, but obviously the force of gravity downward, it was a lot larger since its mass is going to be larger if it's steel.
Perfect, perfect, thank you. So I hope everybody did a similar thing. The buoyant force, the length of that buoyant force vector should be identical to the previous two situations. Sorry, not the third one, but the first one and the second one. It should be identical because it's displacing light. But the force of gravity is going to be significantly longer and should be, of course, larger than the buoyant force there. We'll come back to my bowl of water here in a little bit. All right, any questions about that?
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So for the fourth one, would it then be accelerating?
Yes, it should be. The one thing that maybe we aren't considering is the fluid friction, and that may be worth noting, is that if it is moving down in the water, the amount of friction with the water is going to be significantly more than air friction. Usually we can ignore air friction, but as it goes faster in the fluid, yes, we should have some fluid friction there that's pointing back up in the opposite direction. And so initially, will it be accelerating? Absolutely. As it gets faster and faster, it should reach, just like a skydiver, it'll reach a terminal velocity, at which point the fluid friction upwards and the buoyant force upwards balance the gravity downwards. So it's a very good, yes, thank you for bringing that up.
So at the bottom, if it's just at the bottom of the bowl, would it not have to be equal?
Well, the forces have to be equal because it's stopping, but then you have the normal force of the bowl pushing upwards. So that's going to aid the buoyant force. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's a very good point about the fluid friction. Yeah, Dory.
Yeah, so I was just gonna ask, within the AP Physics exam, will we ever have to account for fluid friction?
My understanding, I'll have to double check on this, and I'll make a note to look at it. But my understanding is that you likely won't have to deal with it quantitatively, but you may have to deal with it qualitatively, right? Conceptually, kind of like what we just did, right? I think you probably did a similar thing in Physics 1 with air friction, right? You had to understand the idea of a skydiver reaching terminal velocity due to air friction, and that as he goes faster and faster, there's more and more air friction till it balances out. You definitely have to be able to do that qualitatively, but I'll have to double check. I don't think that there's anything about the quantitative fluid friction there.
Okay, thank you.
If you have time later, the water dispenser is leaking. Only when you have time.
Like, not yet. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll take care of it. Okay. Awesome. Let's, thank you. Any other questions on that? I'm going to move on. Okay. I'd like for us to look at example number 7 there. Okay, if you're looking at the notes packet there, example number 7 is a 15-kilogram gold statue is being raised from a sunken treasure ship. What I'd like to do is give you guys about 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to send you out in breakout rooms to chat about this and try to work through it on your own. And then we'll come back and just make sure. But if everybody's got the same thing, we're good. We'll move on. And if we're struggling with the idea, then we'll take a little bit more time talking about it. Okay. Is there anybody that cannot see the example number 7 there? Everybody's got access to it. Lovely. Okay, perfect. I'm going to send you out into groups then. We'll go groups of 3 or 4. That'll work. All right. I will see you in about 3 or 4 minutes.
I think you would need a force that is equal to the weight of the gold statue minus the buoyancy force.
Yeah, to be able to create a net force upwards.
Or no net force. So that it's equal to the normal force.
Yeah. Because for us to be able to pull it out, it has to have like net force upwards, because if there's no net force, then it's just.
Or I don't think you would need a
It says
net force because it's
velocity, but I don't know. On a constant S.
I agree. Constant velocity, net force is 0.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Where am I at on my list of doom? Duru, can you share with us what you guys did?
For question A, we said that the force would have to be equal to the normal force or the weight so that it could create a constant velocity on the block. And then for letter B, we said that we weren't 100% sure, but we said that the tension would have to be equal to the force of gravity because we didn't know if the block would be in constant velocity still, like if the question meant like the block was still in constant velocity after it was out of the water, or it just was not moving out of the water.
All right. Did you guys calculate any numbers or just did it conceptually?
I think we did it conceptually.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Duru. So that's a good start for us. Isaac, can you, I heard you guys at the very end. Can you share with us what you guys did to get a numerical answer there?
Yeah, so we started out by finding the volume of, well, first found the density of gold on the internet, which is 19,300 kilograms per meter squared. Then we used the density equals mass over volume equation, which we rearranged to find the volume, which was 7.7 times 10 to the negative 4 meters cubed, sorry. And then we used that to find the buoyant force, which is FB equals rho VG. So we got 7.62 newtons. And then we drew a free body diagram with mg pushing down, or pulling down rather, and then buoyant force and tension pushing up. And so based off that, you know mg equals buoyant force plus tension. Rearrange that, tension equals mg minus buoyant force. Then since we already have all those numbers, we can do the math, get 139 newtons for the tension. And then, do you want part B as well, or?
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, so I just projected on the screen what Isaac basically talked through. Okay, so he said, well, the first thing is, Duru talked about the forces and talked about balancing the forces. Okay, so that's one of the good things about this question is that, at different levels, you can either look at it conceptually or you can look at it mathematically. So conceptually, if we consider it, the statue's under the water, there's some buoyant force there, you've got the tension pulling up on it, and you got the force of gravity. And so as Duru said, the force upwards has to balance with the force of gravity. Now the upward force, you do have both the buoyant force upward because it is submerged under the water, so the water is pushing up on it. And then you also have the tensional force of the rope pulling up. And so the way I've written it here is just that the sum of the forces, these both are forces upwards, so they're positive forces, and then I've got a negative force of gravity pulling down. Sum of the forces should equal 0. Okay, and so that connects in with Duru's explanation of the forces being balanced. From there, we can actually find these numbers if we go, as Isaac said, go search up the density of gold. And this was the density of gold in kilograms. Sorry, I was going to write mass. Kilograms per meter cubed. So if you look that up, then you get 19,300 kilograms per meter cubed. And with the mass being 15 kilograms, you can find the volume. And of course, the volume is important because you're going to need it in your density equation, and you're also going to, well, I guess you don't need it in the gravity, but you do need it in the density, the buoyancy equation. Remember, buoyancy is rho VG, and remember the rho and the V are both referring to the liquid that's been pushed out of the way. Okay, so it's the density of the water, and it's the volume of the water that's been pushed out of the way, which is the same as the volume of the statue. Okay, and then multiply by gravity, 9.81. As long as everything's in SI, then the units will end up working out. And so then you have the weight at the end, which is the weight of the actual gold idol. And so as Isaac said, at that point, it's just mathematics. You solve for T, and the tension that you get should be equal to about 139 newtons. I think all the information was 3 sig figs, so we'll go ahead and go with 3 sig figs there. All right. I'm not going to go all the way through the second one. However, the only difference, what's the only difference in the first and second scenario, A and B?
There's no buoyancy
There's no
force.
force.
No buoyant force. So in the second scenario, it's going to be exactly the same, but you just have the force of gravity, which should still be the same. And then the tension, assuming, as Dewar made a good point, assuming that it's either a constant velocity or zero constant velocity, the tension then has to be equal to the force of gravity, which means you can just take out the buoyant force there, and tension is equal then to the force of gravity. All right, awesome. So you can see what a difference buoyancy makes, and in the case of this statue, not a whole lot. Your answer for part B should be 147 newtons. All right, any ideas on that? Yes, Camila.
Sorry, just to clarify, for the rho equals m over v, is that the density of gold or water? Is that gold?
Good question. We were, at this point, we were trying to find the volume of the statue, right? So to find the volume of the statue, we needed to deal with the density of the statue. And so we had the mass of the statue. And so by using the density of the statue itself, therefore the density of gold, then we were able to calculate the volume.
And then the density in rho Vg down here would be water because that's the...
Yep, that's right. This is exactly because that's the buoyancy, and the buoyancy depends on the fluid that's been pushed out of the way. And so that's the density of water and the volume of the water that's been displaced, right? Which is the same as the volume of the statue as long as it's completely submerged.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, perfect, exactly.
Questions in the homework were wanted to be more specific with the density of the surrounded fluid. So like using the density of seawater or something like that. Would you want us to do the same here or?
I don't think it'll make a huge difference in the numbers. I would say I would say 9 times out of 10, you're okay just using the density of water being 1,000. If you look up the density of salt water, it's like 1,050 or something, right? So it's not hugely significant. It might cause some small changes in the answer. I'm not too concerned about that right now, but you're correct. Technically, it probably should be. It didn't say it was in the ocean. Maybe it was in a lake or something, maybe Lake Superior or something. I don't know, but you're right. That is something possibly to think about. On an exam, you're not going to have to go look anything up, right? I think that's an important thing to consider, is just that on an exam, if that's kind of what you're concerned about there, an exam would give you the density, right? It wouldn't say look it up. You wouldn't have to worry about which one you're supposed to be using because it'll be clear. Okay, anybody else? Awesome. Okay, we're gonna move along. Let's look at concept test number 4, CT number 4. Let me see if I can open that up here. I think you've all got it in front of you, right? So the question is, you've got 2 identical rectangular blocks of ice. In the first beaker, the block of ice is floating horizontally. And in the second one, the ice is floating vertically. So the question is, in which scenario does it displace more water, or does it push more water out of the way? Is it scenario A, scenario B? Are they the same, or is there no way to be able to tell? What I'd like you to do is just think about it for a minute. Go ahead and write down your thoughts on the paper. When you are confident in an answer, or whether you're confident or not, I want you to commit to an answer. Type it in the chat, but don't push enter yet. Just type it in so that when I say push enter, you can just push enter and then everybody's answers will come up at the same time. All right, so in which scenario does it displace more water? There you go. All right, get an answer into the chat there. Don't push enter yet. I'll tell you when. All right, go ahead, push enter, see what you got. All right, good. It looks like most people have got the right answer. It'll displace the same amount of water. If the blocks are identical, they have the same weight, right? They have the same mass, same weight. Therefore, in order for them to float, they need to have exactly the same buoyant force. And if the buoyant force is the same, it means that they displaced exactly the same amount of water. Okay, so very good, very good. You guys have got that idea. I think starting to really put some things together. This one's a little bit tougher. Okay, number 5, the ice cube in scenario B slowly melts. What happens to the overall level of the water in the beaker? Okay, so going back to look at this cup here, okay, the one, it really doesn't matter which one. So in either of these situations, as the ice melts, what's going to happen to the level of the water? Is the level of the water going to go up? Is it going to go down? Is it going to stay the same? Or again, do we not know? All right, again, I'll give you a minute. Put your answer into the chat, but don't push enter yet. All right, make sure you got something typed in there. And push enter. Let's see what you got. There we go. That's a better answer. We got lots of mixes there. Okay, so we're gonna get a couple of opinions here. I'd like to see, Zaid said it would go down a little bit, so I'd like to hear from Zaid. And then Krisha says the water level will stay the same, so I'd like to hear from her. And let's see, anybody say it went up? Dory, it looks like, said that water was added to the, nope, levels stay constant, nope, okay. Increase. Camila said increases. All right. So let's hear from those three in that order. Zaid, Krisha, and then Camilla.
Okay. Well, I instantly thought that it would decrease because ice floats in water because it has a lot less density. It's less dense than water. Ice, like frozen ice, frozen H2O is less dense than liquid H2O, right? So if you had the same volume of frozen H2O or ice as liquid H2O, the water that was fluid would way more than the water that was ice because it has a larger density for that same volume. So I was thinking the ice takes up, the ice would turn into water, right? But that water would have a smaller volume because it's more dense. So it's like a trade-off, right? So therefore the water level would decrease.
All right. Next up, Krisha.
I thought that the level would stay the same because the ice, like when it's in its ice form, the water's already like been displaced a little bit according to like its mass and density and whatever. And so that when it turns into like when it melts, then I don't really know how to explain this that well, but I just thought like it would like it's already displaced what it would, so it wouldn't displace it any more or any less.
Okay. And Camilla, right?
To be honest, I wasn't really sure. So I just said it would increase. Just because I think, I don't know, because it would melt and so it would increase. I don't know.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Okay. Any thoughts? Anybody want to say anything based off of what they've just heard from our three friends here? Anybody want to change their answer due to what they've heard?
I only agreed to Zaid and adding more onto it. So when the ice melts, the volume that is missing will be in the water, but the volume that was originally on the ice and now in the water cup, because the water surface is much bigger than the cube, so the height will actually decrease. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, I think that's the best explanation I can do.
All right. Anybody else? Any other thoughts before we get our final answer here?
Yeah, can I say thoughts?
Yeah.
So the way I see it is there are three levels of thinking for this problem. The first is that there's the water level without the ice cube and the ice melts and there's more water, so the volume increases. The second level of thinking is that the water is already displaced with the ice cube. And so the water that melts was already part of the ice cube, and so the volume doesn't change. But the third level of thinking is that is using the densities of the water and the density of the ice. And the density of ice, as Zaid mentioned, is, and I actually love Zaid's explanation, and I agree with it. I don't know if it's right, but I agree with Zaid's explanation. The density of ice is less than the density of water. So we have this amount of volume that the ice takes up. But when it melts, it takes up less volume. Why? Is because the mass is the same, all right? But the density of water is greater than the density of ice. So it takes up less volume. I mean, the ice takes up less volume than it did, the mass of the ice. So the volume goes down.
All right. Anybody else? I'm trying to get my iPad connected so I can draw it. I lost my iPad earlier.
I don't know if you like think about it, when you freeze a water bottle, say you have a clear water bottle and you freeze it, the water level will rise because ice is less dense than water and it will take up more volume. And then if you leave the water bottle to melt after it's frozen, the level that it reaches will decrease since water is more dense.
Okay. All right. So here's the danger of experience, right? You guys learned a lot in Physics 1 that sometimes things that we experience cause us to think things that maybe aren't 100% correct. That because experience is a great teacher. Unfortunately, experience sometimes can mess things up a little bit. That idea and recognizing that ice is less dense than water is an important idea. But let me draw this for you real quick. So you've got a cup that's to this level with that ice. Okay, so that ice is taking up some space, right? It's not. You can't even see my whole ice block. This is sad. Okay, what if I turn this off? Hoping maybe if I turn off some devices. You're scared now. You should be scared. All right. I think it's going. Okay, this ice. How much water is there? You're right, Akrit. The whole cube is not submerged. If the whole cube was submerged, right, and this is what a lot of you are thinking about, is that if the ice cube was submerged, this ice, when it's melted, will take less space. And that's true. That ice will take less space, and therefore the water level will go down. However, that is not the scenario. The ice cube is not submerged. How much of that ice cube is displaced? How much of that ice cube is submerged? It won't actually be 50%, but yes, in my drawing, it's 50% accurate. The volume displaced here, right? The volume that has caused water displace is equal to rho Vg, right? It's equal to the buoyant force. The force of gravity down on this ice needs to be equal to the buoyancy force up, which means that the force of gravity down on my ice cube is exactly the same as the force of gravity on the water that's been displaced. Right? That ice, when it melts, will only take up that much space. That's exactly how much space it takes up. Why? Because the water is going to be the same density as all the water around it. It's going to take up the amount of space that was required to keep that mass floating in the first place. Therefore, the water level will not change. The water level will stay exactly the way that it is because initially this buoyant force has to be equal to the force of gravity on the ice. And somebody pointed this out the first day that we talked about buoyancy. They said, well, isn't rho v just mass? Yes, it is just mass. It's the mass of the water times gravity, which is equal to the gravitational force, which is the mass of the ice times gravity. The mass isn't changing. The mass is the same in both scenarios. Therefore, the water level will stay the same.
Okay, so I said that the water level would stay the same, so I completely get this. But the way you're showing this, wouldn't it the remaining ice, wouldn't that still displace some amount of water?
There won't be any ice remaining when it melts.
Oh,
right?
We're talking it melts completely.
Yeah, this block of ice, right? That mass, when it melts, that will be equal to the mass of water that was displaced to keep it afloat. That's how much ice is there. Right? In order for them to float, the buoyant force and the gravitational force are the same. Gravitational force is the mass of the ice times gravity. The buoyant force is the mass of the water that's been displaced times gravity. Those two things have to be equal. Since gravity is the same, that means that the mass of the ice has to be equal to the mass of the water that's been displaced. And you're not seeing all my drawings that I'm putting on there right now, but eventually. The volume. Okay, so Akrit's asking about volume. Okay, would the total volume of the system decrease? Yes. Yes, because you won't have the ice sticking up out of the water anymore, so that will be gone. But the level of the water should remain exactly the same. All right. Questions?
So the level of the water would remain the same because it's the same mass that it's going to take up, or the same volume.
Mass. The mass of the ice is the same as the mass of the water that's been pushed out of the way, right? It's the same as the amount of space that's submerged, but in water. And because those two masses are the same, when the ice melts, it's going to have the same mass, but it's going to take up less space. Some of it was outside of the water. That melts to actually fill that hole that was created with the ice.
Oh, okay.
So the water level on a measuring cup measures water displacement rather than the actual volume of the water. Is that accurate?
Say that again.
The water volume markings on a measuring cup, they don't measure the actual volume of the water, but actually how much space the water displaces. Okay, no, I'm not saying that right.
That should be the same. That should be the same. But I think what you're saying is if I've got a measuring cup and I put ice in there, the ice I might have more than a cup of water there, right? The volume might be higher than that.
Yeah.
But when that ice melts, it should be at the cup level, right? If I measure a cup and it says a cup with white water and ice, then when the ice melts, it'll still be a cup.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
But that only works with water and ice, right? Because they're the same mass, right? They're the same stuff, right? If you use water and something else, that may not be the case anymore, right? Okay, awesome. We're gonna move along just because I'm running short on time here. I'm gonna try one more time to share my screen to try to get just a last couple of ideas in. Okay, the first idea is looking at the fraction of something that's submerged. Okay, and again, I'm hoping this works. So the fraction looks like it's showing up. Submerged. And I'm sorry, this is just going to be a couple of notes for the last little bit because we got to make sure to finish this up so we can start the fluid motion stuff next time. Is equal to the volume that is submerged divided by the total volume. So Akrit had made a comment earlier on, how much of the ice is submerged, and he said 50%. Well, in this situation, I've got more down below. So the fraction submerged here might be more like 75%, right? I've got a certain volume that's below, and then I've got a certain total volume, and the fraction submerged is the submerged volume, this piece right here, divided by the total. It tells us how much of that object is under the water, right? Something to recognize is that the volume submerged, and this is what we were just talking about, the volume submerged is equal to the volume of the displaced fluid. Right? This is what we were talking about with the ice, is how much of the ice is submerged. Well, that tells you exactly how much fluid has been pushed out of the way. Okay, so if we do this, we can say because the volume submerged is the same as the volume of the submerged fluid, we can rewrite this first fraction, the fraction submerged, equals the volume of the displaced fluid divided by the total volume. Okay. Then we can rewrite volume as mass times density. The fraction submerged is equal to the mass of the displaced fluid times the density of the displaced fluid divided by the mass of the object, the total mass of the object, and then the density of the object itself. And then one of the things that we were just talking about is that the mass of the displaced fluid has to be equal to the mass of the object, because the force, remember the force of buoyancy is equal to the force of gravity on that displaced fluid. Okay, the force of gravity on the object is equal to the mass times the gravity. So these two things here, the mass of the displaced fluid, the mass of this fluid, and the mass of your object overall, those two masses have to be the same in order for the buoyant force and the gravitational force to balance out. Okay, so these cancel out, which means that our final formula is that the fraction submerged is equal to the density of the fluid over the density of the object. Okay, so this is a formula that you may use as you're working with things floating on the water. It'll help you to figure out some things with density and forces and other things like that. Okay, we don't have time to look at the example, but just keep that in mind as you work later. And I'm about to lose my whiteboard again, I think. All right. Okay, we're gonna finish with one last thing, and then we'll just start with this next time. We're really close, but not quite. I got my water here again, but here's, I've lost my, that's pretty awesome. Okay. So apparently we're going to start with this next time because one of my daughters walked in and took away my paperclip. So anyway, we'll go ahead and start with this next time. We'll do about 10 minutes of surface tension, and then we'll go into the actual motion of the fluid dynamics. All right. So that's it for today. Are there any questions before we wrap things up? Okay. All right. In that case, you guys are done for today. Thank you. Lots of good discussion. Lots of good talking about things. We'll pick it up there next time.
Bye, Mr.
Thank you.
Bywater.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. Bywater.
Bye. Have a good
Good
day.
afternoon.
You stay in tune.